Hello everybody, hello Laziali all over the world. Welcome to the Lazio Lounge, the first podcast in English about Lazio. I'm Vittorio Campanile and co-hosting with me the Alasdair Mackenzie.
Hello, good to be here. Here we go. It's exciting to get this kicked off, to get a chance to talk about Lazio. It's just a bit disappointing the context in which we have to begin.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, I think the season was simply amazing. We ruined it with this last couple of matches. I mean, let's start talking about Crotone-Lazio. Very disappointed. I don't know if
we have to. I just read on Twitter just now. It's been 8 years apparently since Lazio have lost 4 games in a row. So like you were saying, it's incredibly disappointing because it's been such a positive, optimistic season in so many ways in terms of the impact Inzaghi had, the situation the club were in last summer, the young players coming through, and here we are. We get leapfrogged by Atalanta. It doesn't really matter in terms of their Europa League place is still safe and so on, but yeah, it leaves you with a sour taste, doesn't it, at the end of the season?
Absolutely, and there's a little bit of difference money-wise that you receive from UEFA if you arrive 4th and 5th. So, there's a little bit of difference there. I think the motivation, the Lazio today tried to win the match, but wasn't really focused. Same thing, against Inter, against Fiorentina. I'm a little bit concerned for next season because, you have to be concentrated. You're going to lose a lot of energy because you're going to be on 3 competitions next year. And, you could finish the season much, much better. Of course, there were a lot of players missing today. So, I'm pretty sure Inzaghi will say that there have been some reason to explain this defeat. But anyway, really, really disappointed. I don't know what you want to say about the defense. What was your impression? But...
Well, the defending, I mean, it's all very well when Lazio play this very exciting open style of football, which they have done in recent weeks. There's been the 7-3 game against Sampdoria, has been a 6-2 win. When you have these big scores, it's fun and you can laugh about it and it's great to watch. But it's still too many goals being conceded, and it sounds a bit negative when you win big games to pick up on that fact, but then that becomes kind of underlined in games like this where Crotone have had an amazing end to the season, and I think we should mention that this is an absolutely remarkable story that they have turned this around today, and credit to them for doing that. But we are still talking about a team who had 9 points in January in the whole league, so it's not a team that Lazio should be struggling against so much. And my main concern is the fact that as soon as you take Keita De Vrij out of that defence, there's no composure, there's no leader in that defence, and you have people like we have a question later on. We're going to talk about Wesley Hoedt in particular.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure in the sense that, don't get me wrong, I think De Vrij is a very good defender, but he's not that good. Of course, from you hear Manolas for 40 million euros doesn't exist. Otherwise De Vrij costs like twice the Manolas. But he made mistakes, and he made mistakes in very important matches. Even against Juventus, he lost his man when Juventus scored the second goal. So De Vrij, it's a leader. I agree, but I'm not sure he's fundamental.
I don't mean to say that I think he is the perfect defender. I mean to say his experience and his, on an international level, he's played at World Cups as well as being a Lazio player, and I think the whole defence looks so much more comfortable when he's in the team. It's like Lucas Biglia. I mean, a lot's been made of the fact that the team changes when Biglia isn't there because he makes everyone feel more relaxed. And that Lazio defence tonight, it didn't look comfortable. It didn't look relaxed. Wallace he'd be doing overhead kicks. He'd be throwing his leg at balls, and Bastos gets sent off because he makes 2 stupid decisions. And it's constantly the same, and there aren't enough leaders in that defence, and I think that's a big problem for us.
I totally agree, but for example, Bastos was surprising today. He didn't play that much, but for example, in the derby, he was by far the best defender, I thought, for Lazio. He played very, very well in those matches. I was concerned, a little bit surprised he didn't play that much during the season, and so I was looking forward to see him play tonight. And unfortunately, he made two stupid decisions, as you were saying. But I still feel he's really good. What concerned me is Radu, for example. The first goal is all a mistake of Radu, that it's completely out of position. So Wallace have to go slide to the left, and in the middle of the box there's Bastos on his man, and the other one coming with the Basta struggling. So I think Radu is the typical player that is good to bring you to Europe League, but if you need to make the step forward to compete for Champions League, etc., you need to find a replacement. So obviously, and it's the first time I heard Tare saying these things. He said that Biglia, De Vrij and Keita, we want to keep them. So, that's a good sign. But if I have to choose, if you tell me today, hey, okay, all of them can't stay, one has to leave, then between Biglia, Keita and De Vrij, I choose De Vrij.
Really?
Yep.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's hopefully not a situation we have to find ourselves in where you have to choose one. But
what
I don't know.
Would you choose?
I think, well, for me, it's dependent on so many things. If we're talking about money, and if you talk about the mechanics of the transfer market and the way that Claudio Lotito operates, I think if you get a club like Milan, who now have Chinese money coming in, and they're offering 30 million euros for a guy like Biglia, who's over 30 years old, an essential midfielder, for me, I think that kind of reminds me of the Hernanes move, which was heartbreaking and horrible at the time for Lazio fans, but turned out to actually be a very good piece of business in terms of selling him when he was past his peak, maximising the money you can get for him. But if you can actually cash in on, I mean, Keita and De Vrij have a lot more of a future than Biglia does. Biglia is a more important player for the team at the moment, but then if you're going to get 30 million for him, then I'd say that probably.
But Hernanes was playing already bad for Lazio. He's difficult because he doesn't have an exact position in the midfield. So, it's difficult. You have to build the team around him. Biglia dictates the tempo of the team, and he's very, very good in defense, So, and do you see another... I don't mean that Biglia is the best midfielder in the world. Not at all. But I'm not sure Lazio can find a replacement. And you need a replacement.
These are all guys who would be very, very difficult to replace. And the unfortunate fact is that that's a situation we're very likely to be in very soon. And the possibility of replacing them isn't looking good, I don't think.
But for example, with De Vrij, if De Vrij leaves, you have already Bastos, Wallace and Hoedt that could play starters. And they prove that they're a good starter. Of course, you need to buy someone else because, especially if you play in 3 competitions, you need at least 4 central defenders. But I feel good about that. Instead, if you sell Keita, and the names around, it's embarrassing. I mean, I don't want to think that Borini can be the replacement of Keita, but that's concerning. I don't think that we're gonna buy a player at the level or better than Keita. So, I think if I have to choose, probably De Vrij is my man.
For me, I think Keita is probably the most easily replaceable in that he has been important to the team for a less amount of time. This has been the first season where he's consistently, and I say consistently in inverted commas because he hasn't been in the team all season, but this has been his first campaign for Lazio where he's been a key player, I suppose, and I think that would be easier to replace an attacking player, possibly, although more expensive to replace. But for me, it's kind of a personal thing because I remember writing an article about Keita about 3 years ago when I was convinced that he was going to become this super talented player, and it would be very frustrating now once he started to finally show that ability to lose him at this stage. It would be very sad. So I really, really hope he stays.
Yeah, me too. I think, I was following Keita and Tuncara when they were playing for Primavera. And, they look so promising. And Keita did an immediate impact the first year. Then he struggled a little bit, especially with Pioli. Now he's finally showing all his talent. To sell him now, I think he has to stay at least 2 years here and prove that he's really that player. And then, 2 years' time, Real Madrid comes, buy him for 55 millions. You can accept that, but not now, not now. Anyway, we should be talking about Crotone-Lazio. We're already talking about transfer market.
Yeah, so plenty of time to talk about transfers.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was encouraged by Murcia today. I think he played really, really well. And in the second half of the match, he played in the position of Biglia. What's your thought about Murcia?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, Danilo Cataldi going out on loan in January was a big opportunity for Murcia, and for me, he's kind of taken that opportunity, not in the sense of becoming a first team regular and so on, but in terms of becoming a very, very much a regular part of the first team squad, understanding his role better. He has a great role model in Lucas Biglia. And I think he probably feels like a more important part of the squad because he doesn't have to compete with Cataldi as well. What happens once Cataldi returns is another story. But I think you can see what so many Lazio fans like about this team is the fact that players like Murcia are being given the opportunity to show their ability. And the Crotone game, obviously, it was beyond doubt once it was 3-1. But at the end of that game, you had 5 players. You had Strakosha, you had Spizzichino, Murcia, Rossi, and I'm forgetting someone, Creco. You had 5 guys from the Primavera team who were on the pitch in the Serie A game, and that didn't happen so long ago. So for me, that's, despite the result, it's good to see that continuing trend of Inzaghi giving people a chance.
And I think that's the biggest difference. With Inzaghi, a lot of youngsters are playing. And what I was thinking before is, Lazio in the last 9 years at Primavera level was always competing or winning something. And it was absurd that, last year, only Onadzi and Keita really had the chance to play in the first squad. And Cataldi, only 3 players out of 9 years. That wasn't acceptable. And I always thought that the problem weren't the player, but the manager of the first squad that never give a chance to them. And Inzaghi just proved that there are a lot of good players, because Lombardi didn't play today, but he already scored and played and showed that, of course, he's not Keita, he's a different player, but he can absolutely play in Serie A. And then don't forget that Minala, for example, Palombi, that I think that next year can become handy, are playing in the Serie B, and they are playing really well. So Lazio have built this team, and this is where I get really upset, because you don't need to spend 35 millions next year to improve the team. You have already all this youngster. You just need, a couple of good players like Vice Immobile, really good. That could be Zapata, for example, because we need a strong striker, someone who is weight and is good with the header, etc. And probably a couple of players in the midfield where we are really short, especially now without Cataldi. But, the team is there. I think Milan and Inter are behind us. And with 3-4 good players, we can really compete for the 4th place. And don't forget that next year, it's Champions League if you arrive 4th in Serie A. Yeah,
and like you say, if you're not going to give the young players a chance, if you've got a Primavera team that's doing well, that's winning trophies, then there's not an awful lot of point in investing that money in the youth structure and not giving them a chance. So something I've liked about Inzaghi is the fact that when he's had the option of bringing on more journeyman players from the squad and guys who perhaps don't have an obvious future, instead of guys like Filip Djordjevic, for example, who isn't a very good striker, really, most of us realise now. And instead of that, he's actually given chances to young guys like Lombardi, who you mentioned, and Lombardi has scored goals